This video was brought to you by Brilliant. Last month, Germany released its crime statistics for 2023, and in more bad news for the German government, the total number of crimes recorded in Germany was up 5.5% year on year and 10% higher than the pre-pandemic level. On top of that, the German Sunday newspaper Welt am Sonntag, which gained exclusive access to the data, said that violent crime was rising at an especially fast rate, climbing 9% year on year to a 15-year high. Unsurprisingly, these numbers have sparked a political kerfuffle in Germany, with the right blaming the government and the recent influx of migrants, and the left attributing it to Germany's socioeconomic decline. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Germany's emerging crime crisis, its possible causes, and how it might affect both German and European politics. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start by looking at the data. For most of recent history, Germany has been one of the safest countries in Europe. According to data from the late 2010s, Germany had some of the lowest burglary rates, homicide rates, and incarceration rates in all of Europe, albeit a slightly higher than average assault rate. This is pretty consistent with the stereotype of Germans as people who love rules and order. And according to the European Crime Index, which basically aggregates all of this data and gives an overall value for how unsafe a country is, Germany was the safest large country in Europe, including France, Italy, the UK, and Spain from 2012 until 2015, and the second safest after Spain for the remainder of the decade. And even this wasn't because crime in Germany spiked in the 2010s, but mainly because crime in Spain fell. In fact, aside from a slight spike in the mid-2010s, Germany's crime rate, that is the total number of crimes relative to overall population, has been steadily declining for most of the past few decades, falling from about 8,000 crimes per 100,000 people to about 6,500 in 2019, the last year before the pandemic. And ultimately, this is kind of what you'd expect. For most of this time, the German population was getting both wealthier and older, and in general, rich old people commit fewer crimes than younger people. And over this time, the types of crime also changed, with there generally being fewer violent crimes and more non-violent crimes, including stuff like drug-related crimes and online fraud. However, in the past couple of years, this trend has apparently reversed. In 2022, the overall crime rate rose from 6,000 per 100,000 people to 6,700, but this was mostly attributed to the end of COVID restrictions and was similar to the pre-pandemic level of 6,500. However, according to the government's newly released statistics, in 2023, the total number of crimes rose yet again to 5.94 million, which implies a rate of about 7,000 per 100,000 people, the highest figure since 2017. But perhaps most worrying is the drastic rise in violent crime, reversing a decades-long trend. According to stats, the total number of violent crimes climbed 8.6% to 214,000 cases, the highest figure since 2010. Now, this was mostly driven by a 7% increase in cases of dangerous and serious bodily crime, with 154,000 recorded cases, the highest figure ever. There was an even steeper 17% rise in theft, with 45,000 recorded cases, and a 10% rise in knife attacks, with 9,000 recorded cases. Now, urban areas saw the steepest increases, with Berlin being particularly affected. Burglaries in the capital, for instance, rose by an astonishing 35% in just the past year, and the city is now the least safe part of the country. Unsurprisingly, these numbers have caused a bit of an uproar in German politics, with the Christian Democrats demanding an emergency debate in the Bundestag a few days after the data was published. In that debate, both the Christian Democrats and other socially conservative parties, including the AfD, blamed the rising crime on immigration, noting that 41% of all suspects were people without German citizenship, despite representing only 15% of the wider population, and that the number of non-German suspects rose by nearly 18% compared to 2022, while the number of German suspects rose by only 1%. Now, this number in some way overstates the real fraction of crimes committed by foreigners, because it includes immigration law violations, which obviously can't be committed by Germans. Even if we take those numbers out, though, the proportion of foreign suspects did increase 2.5% year on year and stood at 34% in 2023. The data also suggests that the number of violent crimes committed by foreigners rose by roughly 15% in 2023, and those that are German passport are now responsible for nearly 60% of all violent crime. As well as tightening borders, the CDU has also expressed support for offshore processing schemes akin to the UK's Rwanda scheme, and certain CDU politicians have called for Germany to return migrants to other EU countries like Italy. On the other side of the political aisle, while the SPD admit that immigration is having an impact and have promised to speed up the deportation measures for foreign criminals, they nonetheless insist that the government won't significantly amend its immigration policy and will instead do more to integrate migrants into German society. Certain SPD politicians have also blamed the increasing crime on the politically destabilizing effects of inflation and weak economic growth. And other politicians on the German left have argued that blaming the rise solely on immigration ignores the other confounding variables, including, for instance, the fact that immigrants are generally poorer and younger. Now, this debate kind of mirrors a similar situation in Sweden, which has also seen a steep rise in crime recently, where the right blame it on immigration, while the left blame it on integration, or rather the lack thereof. Ultimately, whatever the case, and whoever's right, the new crime data presents the government with two difficult problems. The first is political. Obviously, high crime rates are never good news for an incumbent government. But on top of that, polling suggests that most Germans already think that Scholz and co. are too weak on immigration. A poll from late last year, for instance, found that roughly 2/3 of voters thought the government was letting in too many asylum seekers, and these numbers will only make things more difficult for them. The second problem is economic. Integrating migrants, not to mention the increased costs of policing associated with higher crime, all cost money. But the combination of weak economic growth and the FDP's aversion to any significant increase in borrowing means that Scholz doesn't really have money to spend, and finding more would probably involve further cuts to public spending elsewhere, which wouldn't be popular with either the German public or the more fiscally liberal parts of his coalition, especially the Greens, which leaves him without anywhere really to turn. Ultimately underpinning this topic is a lot of data, whether that's economics, trade patterns, polling, or demographics. A lot of the time with politics, you just have to understand the data. So if you want to get a better grasp on these kind of things, I'd recommend Brilliant. And they've just introduced a whole bunch of new data courses, which are perfect for learners of any level, taking you through everything from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. It even uses real data sets from the likes of Starbucks, X, and Spotify in order to bring things to life. I'm not even a super mathematical person, and I still found it easy and enjoyable to work through. And that's because of how Brilliant is designed, built around learning by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. The good thing is that, like I mentioned earlier, you can learn all of these things quickly and easily because Brilliant's courses are split into easy to digest chunks. Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in just minutes a day, with fun lessons that you can do whenever you have time, replacing mindless scrolling on the train or while waiting for coffee with something actually stimulating and rewarding. So get learning across all kinds of STEM subjects for free for a full 30 days by clicking the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know that you came from us, which really helps us out.